Rachel Brennan started building a small cabin, 14 feet by 10 feet, inside a natural limestone cave in Dakota Territory during summer 1881. And when her neighbors realized the 27-year-old widow was planning to live permanently inside the cave, like some kind of primitive savage, instead of building proper surface housing, they were horrified at what seemed like a descent into madness driven by grief and desperation. Not just unconventional, genuinely disturbing, because everyone knew caves were not places for human habitation. They were dark, damp, dangerous spaces where animals sheltered and miners worked, but nobody lived. Building a cabin inside a cave meant giving up civilization, living like an animal in a hole in the ground, breathing stale underground air, existing in permanent darkness away from proper society. A widow, alone, planning to live in a cave like the world had ended. People didn't just think it was poor judgment. They thought Rachel was losing her humanity, retreating from the world into underground isolation that would destroy her mentally and physically. Rachel Brennan had come to Dakota Territory in 1878 with her husband Michael, a mining engineer who'd been hired to assess mineral deposits. Michael had taught Rachel geology and cave systems during their 3 years together. She'd accompanied him into dozens of caves and mines, learning to read rock formations, understand groundwater patterns, and recognize stable versus unstable underground spaces. Michael had died in 1880 from a mine collapse, not in a cave he'd assessed, but in a poorly constructed shaft built by others ignoring his warnings. Rachel, at 27, found herself widowed with mining knowledge, no family, and the choice between returning east to relatives she barely knew or finding a way to survive independently on the frontier. She chose independence, and she chose it with specific knowledge most settlers lacked. She understood that caves maintained remarkably constant temperatures year-round, averaging approximately 52 degrees in Dakota's limestone cave systems, regardless of surface conditions. Rachel had discovered the cave in spring 1881 while exploring the limestone ridges near her rented room. It was a natural limestone cavern, approximately 40 feet wide and 60 feet deep into the hillside, with a ceiling ranging from 8 to 12 feet high. The cave had a wide south-facing entrance about 12 feet tall and 15 feet wide, allowing excellent natural light penetration for the first 30 feet of depth. Most importantly, the cave was geologically stable. Rachel examined the ceiling and walls with knowledge Michael had taught her. The limestone was solid bedrock. The ceiling showed no cracks or weak points. There were no signs of active water erosion or instability. This cave had existed for thousands of years and would exist for thousands more. Rachel also understood the thermal properties. Cave temperature in Dakota limestone averaged 52 degrees year-round, cool in summer, warm in winter compared to surface conditions. This constant temperature was maintained by the Earth's geothermal properties and the cave's insulation from surface weather. It was free, constant, reliable climate control that required zero fuel. Rachel's plan was methodical. Build a small cabin, 14 by 10 feet, inside the cave, positioned about 20 feet back from the entrance where she'd have natural light during the day, but protection from wind and weather. The cave would provide structural protection, constant temperature and weather isolation. The cabin inside would provide privacy, storage and living space organized for human habitation rather than raw cave dwelling. When Rachel explained this plan to her landlord Peter Williams, a practical homesteader, his reaction was immediate revulsion. "Rachel, you're planning to live in a cave. Not just use a cave for storage or temporary shelter, but actually build your home inside a cave and live there permanently?" The cave provides constant 52-degree temperature year-round, protection from all weather, and structural stability superior to any surface construction. Building a small cabin inside gives me organized living space while leveraging the cave's natural advantages. Rachel, caves are not places for people to live. They're dark, they're damp, they're cut off from fresh air and sunlight. You'll get sick from the unhealthy underground conditions. You'll go mad from the isolation and darkness. This isn't survival, this is giving up on civilization. The cave entrance provides excellent daylight. The constant airflow from entrance to deeper cave sections ensures fresh air circulation, and the stable temperature means I won't freeze in winter or overheat in summer without burning any fuel. Peter looked at Rachel with an expression mixing pity and genuine alarm. Even if the cave is somehow physically adequate, which I doubt, what about your soul? What about your humanity? People are meant to live under the sky, to feel sun and wind, to be part of the world. Living in a cave is retreating from life itself. Rachel, please, this is grief talking. Don't do something you can't undo. But Rachel had already decided. She filed a claim on the land containing the cave, 80 acres, including the limestone ridge. She bought materials for a small cabin, boards for walls and floor, a door, a window, basic furniture, and she began construction inside the cave in June 1881. The work presented unique challenges. Rachel had to transport all materials into the cave, carrying boards, tools, supplies through the cave entrance and positioning them 20 feet back where she'd build. She had to work in cave lighting, bright near the entrance, dimmer further back, requiring lanterns for construction work. But Rachel had advantages too. She didn't need to build a roof. The cave ceiling provided that. She didn't need to weatherproof exterior walls. The cave protected everything. She only needed to build interior walls, floor, and door for a small living space inside the larger cave chamber. Rachel's cabin design was simple. 14 feet by 10 feet, positioned with the long side parallel to the cave entrance to maximize natural light. She built walls from boards, not for weather protection but for privacy and space definition. She built a wooden floor raised slightly above the cave floor for comfort. She installed a door at the front of the cabin within cave. She cut a window opening in the front wall to allow cave light into the cabin interior. The result was unusual but functional, a small board cabin sitting inside a massive limestone cave 20 feet back from the cave entrance. The cabin defined Rachel's living space, bed, table, shelves, stove, while the cave provided the actual shelter from weather and temperature control. Neighbors who saw the construction were disturbed and increasingly vocal about their concerns. Rachel Brennan is building a house in a cave, people said in town. Not using a cave for storage, actually living in a cave like an animal. It's not natural. It's not right. Sarah Miller, a widow who'd been friendly, came to express concerns that were really intervention attempts. Rachel, I've seen what you're building. A cabin inside a cave. I understand you're trying to survive on limited resources, but this is too extreme. Living underground is unhealthy. The damp, the darkness, the isolation will make you sick. You'll develop lung problems from breathing cave air. You'll go mad from living like a hermit in a hole. Please find surface housing, even if it's small. Don't bury yourself alive in that cave. Sarah, the cave maintains constant 52 degrees year-round. It's not damp. The limestone drains well and air circulation is excellent. It's not dark. The entrance provides good natural light for the front portion. And it's not burial. It's using geological structures intelligently for shelter. Rachel, you're educated and intelligent, which makes this even more disturbing. You know better than this. Caves are for animals, for temporary refuge, for desperate hiding. They're not for human homes. What you're building is a descent into savagery. Please stop this before you lose yourself completely. But Rachel kept building through July and August. By early September, she had her cabin within cave complete, a small board structure sitting inside the larger limestone chamber, positioned to catch entrance light, organized for efficient living. The cave itself became her extended home. The cabin provided private living quarters, bed, personal storage, organized space. The cave provided additional space. She set up a work area near the entrance where light was best, stored firewood along the cave walls, used the deeper cave sections for food storage where constant cool temperature preserved supplies. Rachel moved in September 10th, 1881. The immediate experience was remarkable. Interior temperature was exactly as she'd calculated, 52 degrees constantly. Not warm, not cold, just perpetually moderate. She needed a small fire for cooking and slight additional warmth, but nothing like the heating requirements of surface cabins. The light situation was better than expected. During the day, the large cave entrance allowed substantial natural light penetration. Rachel's cabin, positioned 20 feet back, received indirect daylight that was adequate for most activities. She used lanterns for evening and for work in the deeper cave sections, but daytime light was genuinely functional. The air quality was excellent. The cave had natural ventilation from entrance to deeper passages. Fresh air flowed in at the entrance, circulated through the cave, and exited through smaller openings in the deeper sections. Rachel never felt stuffy or oxygen deprived, but the psychological impact was what surprised Rachel most. Instead of feeling buried or confined, she felt protected and secure. The cave was like a fortress. Weather couldn't touch her, temperature stayed stable, threats from outside couldn't easily reach her. She slept better in the cave than she'd ever slept in surface housing. Neighbors who learned Rachel had actually moved into the cave were horrified. Peter Williams organized a group visit, 6 concerned citizens coming to convince Rachel to abandon her cave dwelling before it destroyed her. "Rachel, we're here because we care about you, and we're genuinely worried. You've been living in this cave for 2 weeks. You need to understand how disturbing this is. You're a young woman with your whole life ahead of you, and you're choosing to live like a primitive hermit in an underground hole. This will ruin you mentally and physically. Please come out, find proper housing, rejoin civilization before it's too late." Rachel stood in her cave entrance, the massive limestone opening framing her, the afternoon sun illuminating the cave interior behind her, and tried to help them understand. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not descending into savagery. I'm using geological knowledge to create superior shelter. This cave maintains 52 degrees constantly, no fuel required. It protects from all weather. It's structurally more stable than any cabin you could build. I'm not retreating from civilization. I'm applying knowledge intelligently. But you're living in darkness. You're breathing stale cave air. You're isolated from proper society and normal human interaction." Rachel gestured at the bright cave interior visible behind her. "The cave entrance provides excellent daylight. Air circulation is better than most cabins, and I'm 20 minutes from town, hardly isolated. You're reacting to the idea of cave dwelling without understanding the reality. This is superior shelter, not primitive desperation." The group left unconvinced, certain Rachel would abandon the cave once winter came and she experienced the full horror of underground living. But Rachel understood something they didn't. Winter was when her cave dwelling would prove its greatest advantage. The first significant cold came in November, temperature dropping to 10 degrees overnight. Surface cabin owners fired up their stoves and struggled to maintain adequate interior warmth. Rachel's cave maintained exactly 52 degrees with zero heating. She lit a small fire for cooking and slight additional warmth, bringing her cabin within cave to approximately 60 degrees using minimal fuel. The constant temperature was extraordinary, while surface conditions swung wildly. Warm days, freezing nights, temperature variations of 40 degrees or more. Rachel's cave stayed precisely 52 degrees hour after hour, day after day. It was like living in a perfectly climate-controlled environment that required zero energy input. December brought colder tests, temperatures down to 0 and below. Surface cabins required massive firewood consumption to maintain barely adequate warmth. Rachel used approximately 1/10 the firewood and stayed warmer. The cave's geothermal stability meant exterior cold simply couldn't penetrate the limestone mass surrounding her living space. But Rachel stayed quiet about her success. She knew that moderate winter cold wouldn't convince people who were certain cave dwelling was harmful and primitive. She needed extreme conditions, the kind that would make the difference between her cave's stability and surface cabin's inadequacy impossible to deny. That test came in February 1882, when a blizzard struck Dakota Territory with violence that would freeze the entire region and prove Rachel's cave refuge to be the only truly adequate shelter for 50 miles. It started February 9th as heavy snow, thick flakes accumulating rapidly. By evening it was a full blizzard with wind and snow so intense that visibility was zero. By midnight it was catastrophic. Wind at speeds that tore structures apart, snow so heavy that accumulation measured in feet per hour, temperature dropping to levels that killed exposed humans in minutes. Rachel woke February 10th to a world transformed. Through her cave entrance, she could see nothing but white chaos, the blizzard creating conditions of pure fury outside the protected cave mouth. Snow was blowing into the cave entrance, but only for the first 10 feet. Beyond that, the cave's depth and the turn in the passage meant Rachel's cabin within cave was completely protected from weather. Inside the cave, 52 degrees, exactly the same as every other day. The blizzard raging outside had zero effect on the limestone mass surrounding Rachel's living space. Rachel had prepared well. Food supplies in the cool, deeper cave storage, firewood stacked near her cabin, water from the cave spring that flowed year-round in the deeper passages. She could wait out the storm in complete security, but Rachel's security was unique. Across Dakota Territory, people in conventional surface cabins were discovering that adequate shelter became deadly during extreme conditions. In the town 20 minutes from Rachel's cave, disaster was unfolding in multiple homes simultaneously. Peter Williams's cabin, well built by frontier standards, 16 by 20 feet, peaked roof, good construction, was failing catastrophically. The temperature inside had dropped to 8 degrees, despite burning wood desperately. The cabin walls, exposed to exterior cold and wind, conducted temperature directly inside. The peaked roof provided minimal insulation. The structure that had seemed adequate during normal cold became a death trap during the blizzard. Peter's wife, Margaret, and their 2 children were in severe danger from hypothermia despite being indoors with a fire. The children were lethargic and confused, early signs of dangerous cold exposure. Peter was burning furniture to supplement his depleted firewood, but even desperate measures weren't maintaining survivable temperature. Sarah Miller's cabin was even worse. Her smaller structure, 12 by 14 feet, had dropped to 3 degrees interior temperature. Sarah was alone, burning everything she could find, but the cabin simply couldn't retain heat during the extreme exterior cold. She was experiencing the early stages of hypothermia in her own home: confusion, loss of coordination, dangerous drowsiness. The pattern repeated across the town. Well-built cabins were dropping to temperatures that would kill their occupants. Conventional construction that worked adequately during normal cold was catastrophically inadequate during the blizzard. People were freezing to death indoors despite having shelter and fire. The blizzard continued through February 11th, with no sign of breaking. Temperature had reached 39 below zero. Wind was sustaining at speeds that made any outdoor movement potentially fatal, and inside surface cabins, people were dying. On the morning of February 12th, the 3rd day of the blizzard, Peter Williams made a desperate decision. His cabin was maintaining only 6 degrees, despite burning every piece of furniture he could tear apart. His youngest daughter, Anna, had stopped responding normally. She was drowsy and confused, her body shutting down from prolonged cold exposure. If they stayed in their cabin, Anna would die before the blizzard ended. Peter remembered Rachel Brennan's cave. Everyone had mocked it as savage and primitive, but Peter had seen the cave entrance, large, south-facing, protected, and he remembered Rachel saying the cave maintained constant temperature. If there was any chance it was warmer than his freezing cabin, he had to try. The journey from town to Rachel's cave was normally 20 minutes. During the blizzard, it became a near-death experience that took nearly 2 hours. Peter wrapped his family in every blanket and piece of clothing they owned. He carried Anna, who was barely conscious. Margaret held their son Thomas, who was crying weakly. They left their cabin knowing they might die in the attempt, but would definitely die if they stayed. The blizzard was like walking through solid white chaos. Peter couldn't see more than a few feet. He navigated by memory and desperate hope, knowing generally that Rachel's cave was southeast of town. Wind knocked them down repeatedly. Snow was chest-deep in drifts. The cold was so extreme that Peter's face felt like it was burning despite wrapping. They became lost. Peter wasn't sure if they'd walked in circles. He was disoriented and exhausted, carrying a child who might already be dead, leading a family that might freeze within sight of shelter they couldn't find. And then Margaret screamed and pointed, barely visible through the snow, a dark shape in the limestone ridge. The cave entrance. They'd found it by accident or divine intervention or pure desperate luck. Peter struggled the final 100 yards to the cave mouth. The moment they passed through the entrance, the wind stopped. The temperature, still cold but not lethal, felt tropical compared to the exterior conditions. They'd entered the protected cave system. Peter carried his family 20 feet deeper into the cave and found Rachel's small cabin-within cave. He pounded on the door with numb hands. Rachel opened immediately. The sight of Peter's family, frost-covered, hypothermic, Anna unconscious in Peter's arms, told the entire story. Inside. Now. Get them warm. The cabin within cave was 55 degrees. Rachel had a small fire going for cooking. Compared to the deadly cold Peter's family had experienced, it felt like heaven. Rachel wrapped Anna in blankets near her small stove. The child's color was dangerously pale and her breathing shallow, severe hypothermia that would have killed her within hours if they'd stayed in their surface cabin. Within 30 minutes, Anna began responding. The constant 52-degree cave temperature, plus the modest fire warmth, brought her body temperature back to survivable levels. The children stopped their weak crying and began to recover. Margaret and Peter thawed and realized they were alive. Peter sat in Rachel's cabin within cave, trying to process what had happened. His own cabin, the structure he'd built with confidence, that everyone considered adequate, had dropped to 6 degrees and was killing his family. Rachel's cave, the dwelling everyone called savage and primitive, was maintaining 55 degrees and had just saved their lives. Rachel, I told you living in a cave was descending into savagery. I said you'd get sick from unhealthy underground conditions. I organized people to convince you to abandon this place. And now, my daughter was dying from hypothermia in my cabin, and she's recovering in your cave because I was completely wrong about everything. The blizzard continued through February 13th. Peter's family stayed in Rachel's cabin within cave, crowded but warm and safe. The cave maintained its constant 52 degrees regardless of the fury outside, 39 below zero, violent wind, conditions that were killing people in supposedly adequate surface housing. On February 14th, more desperate refugees arrived at the cave. Sarah Miller had finally abandoned her 3-degree cabin when she realized she was experiencing hypothermia symptoms. She'd made the desperate journey to Rachel's cave, remembering the location and betting her life that cave dwelling was less deadly than her own freezing cabin. Then came 3 more families, total of 14 people, who'd heard through the desperate town network that Rachel Brennan's cave was maintaining survivable temperature. People who'd mocked cave dwelling as primitive were now seeking it as their only refuge from lethal cold. Rachel's small cabin-within cave wasn't designed for 14 people plus herself, but the cave itself provided space. Rachel organized the refugees. Families took positions in different parts of the cave chamber, some nearer the entrance where it was slightly colder but still above freezing, others deeper where constant 52 degrees prevailed. Rachel's small fire plus body heat from 15 people brought the occupied cave sections to 58 to 60 degrees, adequate for survival. The scene was remarkable. 15 people sheltering in a limestone cave while the worst blizzard in Dakota history raged outside. The cave, that everyone called savage and unsuitable for humans, was keeping them alive while their civilized surface cabins sat empty and frozen, inadequate for survival. Peter Williams stood at the cave entrance looking out at the white chaos, and then back at the people sheltering in the cave interior. We built cabins using every technique we thought was proper. Good logs, proper construction, peaked roofs, everything conventional wisdom said was right. And during this blizzard, every cabin in town is below freezing. Multiple cabins are below zero inside. People are dying indoors from hypothermia. Meanwhile, this cave, this natural limestone chamber that we said was primitive and unhealthy, is maintaining constant temperature that's keeping 15 people alive. Rachel didn't descend into savagery. She ascended to wisdom we were too conventional to understand. The blizzard finally ended February 15th, 6 full days of catastrophic conditions. When people emerged and assessed damage, the results were stark. In Dakota Territory, 47 people had died during the blizzard. 32 of those deaths were people who froze to death inside their own cabins, structures that were supposed to protect them, but became death traps when extreme cold overwhelmed inadequate insulation. In Rachel's cave, 0 deaths. 15 people had sheltered in the limestone chamber and survived in comfort while cabins froze and people died. The survival statistics were undeniable. The cave, that everyone called unsuitable for human habitation, had proven superior to conventional construction during conditions that tested everything. Word spread across Dakota Territory. Rachel Brennan's cave dwelling had saved 15 lives during the blizzard that killed 47 people in conventional housing. People came to see the cave. The limestone chamber with the large south-facing entrance, the small cabin positioned 20 feet inside, the deeper passages where constant 52-degree temperature never varied. What they found challenged every assumption about proper shelter. Sarah Miller stood in the cave that had saved her life and publicly acknowledged her error. I told Rachel that living in a cave was descending into savagery, that she'd get sick from unhealthy underground conditions, that she was retreating from civilization. I was completely wrong. This cave provided better temperature control than any cabin, better protection than any surface structure, and saved my life when my proper cabin was freezing me to death. Rachel didn't retreat from civilization. She applied knowledge the rest of us lacked. Over the following months, 7 families approached Rachel about cave-dwelling possibilities. Rachel shared her knowledge freely. Not every cave was suitable, only geologically stable limestone caves with good entrance configurations and natural ventilation. But for those lucky enough to have such caves on their property, the advantages were extraordinary. 3 families successfully adapted caves for dwelling, not full-time residents like Rachel, but winter refuges where they could shelter during extreme cold. 2 other families built surface cabins positioned against cave entrances, using the cave as an insulated back wall and cool storage space. The economic impact was significant for those who understood cave advantages. Rachel calculated she used approximately 5% of the firewood conventional cabins required. The constant 52-degree cave temperature meant she only needed slight additional warming rather than complete heating from frigid exterior temperatures. Her food storage in the cool cave sections meant supplies lasted much longer, and she had 0 maintenance costs. The cave required no repairs, no weatherproofing, no structural upkeep. Some people never accepted cave dwelling as legitimate. They insisted surface housing was proper and civilized regardless of performance. But for people who'd nearly died from hypothermia in their own cabins, or who'd lost family members to freezing in supposedly adequate shelter, Rachel's cave represented practical wisdom that transcended conventional thinking. What Rachel had demonstrated was a principle indigenous peoples had known for millennia. Caves provide remarkably stable thermal environments that can be superior to surface construction for temperature control. Modern earth-sheltered architecture would later formalize these concepts, but Rachel proved them practically in 1881, using geology knowledge and willingness to challenge conventions. Rachel lived in her cave for 14 years until 1895, when she remarried and moved to her husband's ranch. But she never sold the cave property. She maintained it as a potential refuge and demonstration site. During subsequent severe winters, families still used the cave as emergency shelter when their surface cabins became inadequate. The cave dwelling stood, or rather existed, for decades as Rachel's small cabin weathered inside the protected limestone chamber. In 1923, 42 years after Rachel moved in, a geological survey team visited the cave and found the cabin still structurally sound, the cave maintaining exactly the same 52-degree temperature it had in 1881. A photograph from 1894 shows Rachel standing at her cave entrance, the massive limestone opening framing her, the cabin visible 20 feet inside the chamber, Dakota landscape visible beyond. Rachel, then 38, had proven that unconventional shelter could be superior to accepted construction methods, and a journal entry from Peter Williams in 1883 described the February 1882 blizzard. Was freezing to death in my cabin with my family, temperature 6 degrees inside, despite fire, made desperate journey to Rachel's cave expecting to find primitive conditions. Instead found constant 52 degrees, security, survival. The cave we mocked as savage proved superior to every cabin in town. My daughter Anna is alive today because I swallowed my pride and sought refuge in the shelter I'd called unsuitable for humans. Sometimes the most unconventional solution is the only one that works when conventional methods fail completely. Rachel Brennan built a cabin inside a natural cave when everyone said living underground was savage, unhealthy, and primitive. They mocked cave dwelling as retreat from civilization, abandonment of humanity, descent into darkness and isolation that would destroy her. Then the blizzard came with 6 days of 39 below cold and violent wind that froze entire towns. Surface cabins dropped to lethal temperatures, some below zero inside, despite fires. 32 people froze to death indoors in structures everyone considered adequate. Rachel's cave maintained constant 52 degrees through the entire blizzard, sheltering 15 people in stable temperature while cabins became death traps. The primitive cave dwelling saved lives when civilized surface construction killed people. The unhealthy underground air was more breathable than surface cabins, choked with smoke from desperate fires. The savage choice proved wise when conventional choices proved fatal. Rachel didn't retreat from civilization. She applied geological knowledge to create superior shelter using natural cave systems' thermal stability. The cave dwelling exists still. The limestone chamber maintains the same 52 degrees today as in 1881, proof that geological principles work regardless of human opinion about proper housing.